You'll never even own a car, my mother laughed, clinking her champagne glass with my sister, who proudly jingled the keys to her brand new luxury sports car. I sat quietly at the end of the Thanksgiving dinner table, biting my tongue as my father joined in on their favorite family joke. They thought my canvas backpack and commuter bus ticket meant I was broke. They had no idea that as they spoke, 3 of my corporate vehicles were pulling into their driveway with immediate foreclosure papers and that I was the anonymous billionaire who just bought out their entire bankrupt life. What happens when they realize the truth? Hit that subscribe button right now to see the ultimate comeback. My name is Vivian Vance, and for as long as I can remember, I have looked at the world not for what it is, but for how it moves. At 28 years old, people often describe me as quiet, observing, and impossibly patient. I don't speak simply to fill the air with noise. I speak when I have a blueprint to offer. I am a visionary, though for the first 2 decades of my life, that vision was mistaken for a complete lack of ambition. I have always believed that true strength does not roar. It observes, calculates, and builds in the shadows. Long before the world knew my name, my life unfolded in a modest 2-story house on the quiet outskirts of Chicago. It was a home filled with the scent of old wood, pine cleaner, and my mother's frequent, high-pitched laughter. Back then, our family structure felt harmonious, wrapped in the comfortable blanket of middle-class predictability. My father, Richard, ran a small, local logistics company with a handful of delivery trucks, while my mother, Eleanor, managed the household with an intense focus on social appearances. Then there was my younger sister, Emily, who was my exact polar opposite, vibrant, demanding, and constantly chasing the spotlight. Our daily routine was a well-rehearsed play. Every morning, the golden Illinois sunlight would stream through our kitchen windows, illuminating a breakfast table where everything seemed perfectly in place. We looked like the definition of an American dream. Dad would read the morning paper, talking about his dreams of expanding his fleet, while Mom lovingly packed our lunches. On the surface, we were a tight-knit unit, sharing stories and laughter over Sunday roasts in our small backyard. We lacked nothing, yet we possessed nothing that would make a stranger turn their head. It was during these early years that my peculiar habit formed. While Emily begged Dad to drive her right to the school gates in his brightest delivery van, I preferred to walk 3 blocks to the nearest public transit stop. I was 16 years old when I realized that a crowded city bus was the most fascinating classroom in the world. I would sit by the window, watching the complex, chaotic puzzle of urban traffic. I began carrying a small leather notebook, drawing diagrams of bus routes, calculating transit delays, and mapping out how a single well-timed schedule could save thousands of people precious minutes of their lives. To me, our cozy home and my daily bus rides were perfect. I didn't care about luxury. I cared about efficiency. I was content with the rhythm of our ordinary life, finding immense peace in the simple harmony of a family that, at the time, still felt complete and supportive. I truly believed that my quiet passion for public systems was just a harmless hobby that my parents viewed with affectionate amusement. I had no idea that the very streets I mapped from that scratched bus window would one day become the foundation of an empire, or that the warmth in our household was merely a fragile glass facade waiting for the first real storm to shatter it completely. As the years rolled on, the fragile glass facade of our family remained intact, but tiny hairline fractures were beginning to form just beneath the surface. My life moved forward with a quiet, steady momentum. I graduated from high school at the top of my class and transitioned into college, pursuing a degree in systems engineering and urban planning. For me, life was comfortable, focused, and deeply fulfilling. I spent my days in university lecture halls and my evenings analyzing data structures. I was perfectly content with my routine, still taking the city transit every single day, using those long commutes to refine the digital algorithms that would eventually change macro transportation forever. At home, our interactions still maintained an outward warmth. Every Sunday, we gathered around the dining table for family dinners. Dad would proudly discuss the modest growth of his logistics business, and I would listen with genuine interest, offering subtle suggestions on route optimization that he usually brushed off with a gentle pat on my shoulder. My mother would talk about her social clubs, her voice filled with animation. On the surface, the peace was undeniable. We smiled, we passed the mashed potatoes, and we celebrated birthdays. I had big dreams, visions of an interconnected world where public transit was seamless, dignified, and accessible to everyone. I hoped that my hard work would one day make my parents proud, showcasing a different kind of success. However, the air in our household was slowly shifting, carrying a faint, chilly breeze of comparison. The harmony began to feel less like genuine connection and more like a stage performance where the roles were subtly changing. My sister, Emily, had grown into a young woman who craved material validation, a trait our parents, especially Mum, began to nurture with intense enthusiasm. The first real whisper of this shift happened on a rainy Tuesday evening during my junior year. Emily had just turned 18, and Dad had bought her a brand new, sleek silver sedan as an early birthday present. The driveway practically glowed under the porch light. We all stood outside, the cool rain misting our faces as Emily hugging our parents and instantly snapping photos to share with her friends online. Mom turned to me, her eyes shining with pride for Emily. But her gaze cooled significantly when she looked at my worn canvas backpack. "Vivian," Mom said, her voice dropping into a tone that was half joking but entirely sharp, "your sister is finally moving up in the world. When are we going to see you parked in this driveway, instead of walking from that dreary bus stop down the street? It is starting to look a bit odd to the neighbors." Dad chuckled, nudging Mom playfully. "Oh, leave Vivian be, Eleanor. She's our practical scholar. She'd rather save $1 than enjoy the ride." I felt a strange, tightening sensation in my chest, a small signal that the ground beneath my feet was no longer as level as it used to be. I didn't say a word. I simply offered a polite smile, congratulated my sister, and stepped back into the shadows of the porch. They didn't see the complex network models glowing on my laptop screen upstairs. Nor did they understand that while Emily was celebrating a single car, I was busy mapping out the future movement of an entire society. The storm was coming, and the first warning wind had just blown through our front door. The warning wind that blew through our front door materialized into a freezing draft on the day of my university graduation. I had completed my degree in systems engineering a semester early, finishing at the absolute top of my department. To me, the graduation ceremony was not just a celebration of a piece of paper. It was the official launchpad for my grander ambitions. I had spent the previous 48 hours finalizing the foundational code for a decentralized transit routing software, very software that would become the cornerstone of my future enterprise. The university auditorium was packed with proud families, a sea of black caps, and the low hum of excited chatter. When my name was called, I walked across the stage with my chin held high, accepting my diploma with a polite, measured smile. In the crowd, I could see my father holding a camera while my mother and Emily looked on. For a brief moment, standing under the bright stage lights, I allowed myself to believe that the silent distance growing between us would melt away. I hoped they would see that my quiet choices had purpose. That hope vanished the moment we stepped out onto the manicured lawns for family photographs. The afternoon sun was warm, but the atmosphere among us felt strangely strained. Emily had arrived in her luxury sedan, parking it prominently near the venue entrance, her keys jingling loudly in her hand as she complained about the walking distance from the parking lot. We gathered near a brick wall for a portrait. As Dad adjusted his camera lens, a group of my classmates walked past, loudly discussing their plans to carpool to an after-party. Mom adjusted the collar of my graduation gown, her eyes scanning the passing students before settling on me with a heavy, disappointed sigh. "Well, Vivian," she said, her voice carrying across the lawn, easily reaching the ears of several nearby families. "You are finally a college graduate, still standing by that ridiculous claim you made at 16, that you would never need a car." A few distant relatives who had joined us laughed politely, assuming it was a lighthearted family joke. Dad chuckled behind the camera, shaking his head. "Remember when you said public transit was the future, Viv? Still waiting on that future while the rest of us drive." Mom's expression, however, remained sharp, entirely devoid of humor. "It was amusing when you were a teenager, Vivian, but now it is just embarrassing. Your sister is already helping your father expand his logistics fleet, driving to meetings in a vehicle that commands respect. And you are still clutching a bus pass like a child. If you keep choosing this cheap, invisible lifestyle, you will never amount to anything. You will never even own a car." The words cut through the celebratory air like a blade of ice. I felt the gaze of strangers turning toward me. So may we pity others, with mild amusement. My mother's rejection wasn't just a critique of my transportation, it was a public dismissal of my worth. A declaration that my simplicity was a failure in her eyes. I didn't argue. I didn't tell her that the cheap bus pass she despised had allowed me to study the movement patterns of 2 million citizens. I didn't tell her about the venture capitalists who were already looking at my data algorithms. I simply adjusted my diploma folder, looked my mother dead in the eye, and changed the subject to dinner. There was no point in explaining my grand vision to people who could only see the world through the reflection of a polished hood ornament. The fracture was complete, and the deep emotional wound would soon push me into a completely different reality. In the 3 years that followed my graduation, the distance between my family and me grew from a subtle conversational gap into a vast, unbridgeable chasm. I had quietly moved into a tiny, Spartan apartment in downtown Chicago. I had no television, no expensive furniture, and certainly no car. Every single dollar I earned from my entry-level consulting job was funneled directly into registering my intellectual property and coding the beta version of what I called the Vance Transit Network. Meanwhile, my family was riding a wave of superficial prosperity. My father's logistics company had experienced a sudden, aggressive expansion, fueled largely by a massive bank loan that my sister, Emily, had convinced him to take. Emily had officially been named the vice president of the company, and to celebrate, Mom and Dad had thrown her a lavish party, gifting her a customized European sports car. I attended the dinner, sitting quietly at the end of the long table, a ghost in plain sight. I watched as Mom toasted to Emily's brilliant business mind, while completely forgetting to ask about my recent promotion. The true turning point, the moment that permanently shattered my relationship with my family, happened on a rainy Sunday afternoon when I dropped by parents' house unannounced to return a set of old tools. The front door was unlocked, the house quiet except for the low murmur of voices coming from my father Isaome's office. As I walked down the carpeted hallway, I heard my mother's voice, sharp and definitive. Richard, it is the only logical choice. Emily is the future of this family's legacy. She understands growth. She understands presentation. We must consolidate everything under her name. I paused outside the half-open door, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the crack, I saw my father sitting at his mahogany desk, staring at a stack of legal documents.
"And what about Vivian?"
Dad asked, his voice tinged with a mild, fleeting hesitation. "She is still our daughter, Eleanor. If we transfer the property rights and the family estate entirely to Emily's corporate trust, Vivian will be left with nothing." Mom let out a short, dismissive sigh that made my stomach drop. "Vivian has made her choice, Richard. She lives like a transient, riding buses with strangers, refusing to build a respectable image. She lacks the drive to protect wealth. If we give her a share, she will likely give it away or waste it on her useless data hobbies. I have already instructed the attorney to finalize the paperwork. We are officially omitting her from the family trust and the business succession. It is for the protection of our legacy." I stood frozen in the dim hallway, the cold legal reality of their words sinking into my soul. They weren't just choosing not to help me. They were actively erasing me from the family history. They were punishing my humility by stripping away my birthright, completely blind to the fact that while they were fighting over a local delivery business, I was laying the groundwork for a multi-billion-dollar global infrastructure. A profound, heavy silence settled over me. I didn't storm into the room. I didn't shed a single tear in their presence. I quietly placed the tools on the hallway table, turned it around, and walked out into the pouring rain. As I waited at the bus stop, soaking wet, a fierce, unbreakable resolve ignited within my chest. The family I knew was gone. The life of quiet compliance was over. It was time to build my own empire. The morning after discovering the betrayal, I sat at my small kitchen table at 4 o'clock in the morning, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. The pain of being erased by my own mother was a heavy weight in my chest, but I refused to let it paralyze me. Instead, I converted that emotional ache into pure, unyielding focus. I officially registered my company under the name Vance Global Transit. My objective was clear and monumentally ambitious: to create a unified AI-driven mass transit software that could optimize entire city fleets, reducing congestion and costs by 40%. It was a concrete, revolutionary step, and I poured every ounce of my soul into it. For the first 12 months, my routine was relentless. I survived on minimal sleep, working my standard job by day and building my transit network by night. I took the city buses not just to commute, but to pitch my beta software to local transit managers, right there on the road, showing them real-time data on my tablet. I secured a few small, independent regional contracts, and the system worked flawlessly. Word began to spread in tech circles about a brilliant anonymous female engineer who was quietly revolutionizing municipal efficiency. But my first major breakthrough caught the attention of the one person I hoped would just leave me alone. My mother, Eleanor, discovered what I was doing through a mutual acquaintance in the local business chamber. Rather than feeling proud, she viewed my venture as a direct threat to the family's social standing. A daughter publicly working with municipal bus systems was an embarrassment to the high-end logistics image she and Emily were trying to project. The real obstacle arose when I applied for a critical expansion loan from the premier commercial bank in Chicago, the very same institution that handled my father's corporate accounts. I had spent weeks preparing the perfect presentation, but when I walked into the loan officer's glass office, I was met with a cold, sympathetic smile. "I am sorry, Ms. Vance," the officer said, sliding my proposal back across the desk. "Your software analytics are impressive, but we received some rather concerning feedback regarding your operational stability. A prominent member of our advisory board explicitly stated that your project is an unrealistic, speculative hobby, lacking solid familial or financial backing." My heart sank. I didn't need to ask who that board member was. My mother had used her social influence and my father's banking connections to actively poison my reputation, whispering to investors that I was unstable and my business was a fantasy. She was trying to suffocate my dream before it could breathe, attempting to force me back into the box of the failed, practical daughter. The pressure was suffocating. I walked out of the bank into the blistering winter wind, my hands shaking with a mix of exhaustion and fury. The financial doors in my hometown were being systematically locked by my own flesh and blood. The emotional toll was staggering, and the walls felt like they were closing in on me. But as I looked at the crowded city bus pulling up to the curb, it took a deep, steadying breath. My mother thought she could stop a freight train with a few whispered rumors. She had no idea how deep my foundations truly ran. But determination alone cannot pay for servers, and it cannot buy data bandwidth. Fueled by a fierce desire to overcome my mother's blockade, I risked everything. I pooled my remaining savings, took out a personal line of credit, and launched a highly anticipated, large-scale live testing phase of Vance Global Transit across 3 interconnected suburban municipal routes. This was my proof of concept, the presentation that would bypass the local banks and force global syndicates to take notice. Then, disaster struck. On the afternoon of the launch, an unprecedented catastrophic server overload crashed our primary routing algorithm. It wasn't sabotage, it was a basic, brutal miscalculation of real-time passenger data density on my part. Within minutes, dozens of transit buses across the pilot zones were left stranded or running completely off schedule. Commuters were furious. City officials were calling my phone incessantly, and local news blogs immediately picked up the story of the failed tech experiment paralyzing suburban transit. By 9 o'clock that evening, the system was completely shut down. The city canceled our provisional testing contract on the spot, citing operational I walked out of my makeshift office into the freezing, relentless autumn rain, my umbrella forgotten. I walked until my legs ached, finally collapsing onto a cold metal bench inside a dimly lit, deserted transit shelter on the edge of the city. I was completely drenched, shivering, and utterly exhausted. The weight of the past few years crashed down on me all at once. I had no capital left. My reputation in Chicago was ruined, and my mother's mocking words echoed in my head with terrifying clarity. "You will never amount to anything." For the first time in my journey, I felt completely defeated, broken, and entirely alone in the dark. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the wet pavement, listening to the rhythmic dripping of the rain against the metal roof of the shelter. I had played my hand, and I had lost everything. The dream of a billion-dollar empire felt like the childish fantasy my family always claimed it was. Just as I was about to stand up and surrender to the night, the screen of my water-damaged phone illuminated in my palm. The screen was cracked, But the incoming caller identification was clear. It was an international country code originating from a prestigious corporate headquarters in New York City. With a trembling hand, I swiped the screen and pressed the phone to my ear. "Hello? Is this Vivian Vance, founder of Vance Global Transit?" A crisp, professional female voice asked. "Yes, this is she," I replied, my voice raspy from the cold. "Ms. Vance, my name is Catherine Sterling, Senior Managing Partner at Vanguard Global Infrastructure. We have been monitoring your live data feed for the past 4 hours. While your local servers crashed due to hardware limitations, our analytics team discovered that your core routing algorithm successfully processed over 12 million data points per second before the hardware failed. That is a global record for macro transit optimization. Our investment committee wants to fly you to New York tomorrow morning. We are prepared to offer you the full financial backing of our global consortium." I sat frozen on the bench, the rain suddenly fading into the background. A tiny, brilliant spark of hope ignited in the ashes of my failure. The local door had slammed shut, but the ultimate door to the world had just swung wide open. 5 years passed after that fateful phone call in the rain. 5 years of absolute, grinding silence from my end. I moved to New York, accepted Vanguard's backing, and built Vance Global Transit from a struggling startup into a monolithic, world-altering entity. By the time I turned 28, my decentralized AI logistics and mass transit infrastructure spanned 42 major cities across the globe. The company was officially valued at $1.8 billion. I was the majority shareholder, a quiet titan in a world of loud noise. Yet, to my family back in Chicago, I was still just the daughter who couldn't afford a car. Which brought me to today. Thanksgiving. The bus ride to my parents' house for the holiday had been quiet. I'd chosen the window seat, watching the familiar city streets roll past while other passengers dozed or scrolled through their phones. It wasn't the most glamorous entrance, but it served my purposes perfectly. I needed to see them one last time on the ground where they judged me. When I pulled my rolling suitcase up the driveway of my parents' suburban home, the front yard was packed. Emily's brand new 6-figure luxury sports car sat prominently in the center, gleaming under the autumn sun. I quietly walked past it and knocked on the door. The greeting from my mother was exactly as expected. "Oh, Vivian," Eleanor sighed, barely embracing me before looking down at my casual attire. "You actually took the commuter bus here on Thanksgiving. I suppose some habits never die. Your sister, Emily, just drove in from her downtown penthouse. Now, that is how a successful woman arrives." Inside, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. We sat down at the lavishly decorated Thanksgiving dinner table, the scent of roasted turkey filling the air. But before the food could even be passed, the petty remarks began. "You know, Vivian," Emily said, swirling her sparkling cider with a smirk, "if you need a job, my logistics company is always looking for dispatch clerks. It pays better than whatever public transit hobby you're still clinging to. Plus, you might finally save enough to buy a used sedan." Mom laughed, nodding in agreement. "I told her years ago, Emily, your sister, simply doesn't have the drive for luxury. She never own a car." Dad remained uncharacteristically silent, his face pale, staring blankly at his plate. The tension in his shoulders was palpable. Before I could even respond to my mother's predictable jibe, Dad's cell phone on the table began to buzz violently. Then Emily's phone rang, then Mom's. Within seconds, a chorus of frantic notification alerts filled the dining room. Emily answered her phone, her smug expression instantly melting into a look of absolute horror. "What do you mean, frozen? The bank did what?" "We have 48 hours before total liquidation." Dad dropped his fork, his hands trembling as he checked his tablet. "It's over," he whispered, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "The primary creditor just called in our entire multi-million-dollar expansion loan. Because of the recent supply chain mismanagement, our logistics firm has been declared insolvent. The bank is seizing the fleet, the business, and this house. We are completely bankrupt." Mom gasped, clutching her chest, looking around the room as if the walls were physically collapsing. "No, that's impossible. Emily, do something. We can't lose everything." Emily looked completely paralyzed, tears welling in her eyes as she stared at her phone. The illusion of their superficial wealth was shattered in a matter of seconds. The debt they had piled up to look successful had finally crushed them. They were completely ruined, facing total financial destruction at the very table where they had just finished mocking me. The climax had arrived, and the pressure in the room was absolute. Mom was hyperventilating, her hands desperately gripping the edge of the dining table. "There has to be a mistake. Richard, call the bank president. Use our connections." "The bank president won't take my calls, Eleanor," Dad said, his voice entirely hollow, his face buried in his hands. "Our debt was sold to a private global infrastructure consortium this morning. They bought out all our toxic loans, and they are executing an immediate asset liquidation. We are entirely at their mercy." Emily was sobbing openly now, her expensive phone slipping from her fingers onto the hardwood floor. "Everything I built gone in a day. Who would even buy our debt? Who has that kind of capital?" Right at that exact second, the low, vibrating hum of heavy machinery began to shake the dining room windows. The plates on the table rattled. Outside, the bright afternoon sky grew momentarily dim as a sleek, matte-black corporate helicopter lowered itself into the open field just behind our property line. Before my family could even comprehend what was happening, the crisp crunch of footsteps echoed on our front porch. The front door opened, and a sharp, immaculate young woman in a tailored navy blue blazer stepped into the dining room. It was Victoria, my chief executive assistant, whom I had instructed to wait for my signal. She didn't look at my mother, nor did she look at my sister. She walked directly to the end of the table where I sat, stopping to bow her head respectfully. "Forgive the interruption, Chief Executive Vance, Victoria Said," her professional voice cutting through the hysterical, crying in the room like a diamond. "The final transition paperwork for the Chicago acquisition has just been finalized. The board of directors has approved the transaction. We now hold 100% of the voting shares and the debt liabilities of Vance Regional Logistics." Victoria opened a sleek leather folder and placed a thick stack of legal documents right next to my half-eaten Thanksgiving dinner. "We just need your signature to authorize the corporate restructuring and stop the immediate foreclosure on this residential property." The entire room plunged into a suffocating, dead silence. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. My mother's jaw dropped so low it looked unnatural. She stared at Victoria, then her eyes, slowly, horrifyingly traveled over to me. "Chief Executive Vivian, what is the meaning of this? Who is this woman?" I didn't answer right away. I calmly picked up my silver pen, slid the documents toward me, and signed my name in a smooth, elegant script at the bottom of the page. I handed the folder back to Victoria, who nodded, took the papers, and stepped back into a formal posture. I leaned back in my chair, looking directly at my mother, then at my sister. My expression remained entirely calm, completely dignified, and devoid of any petty malice. "The consortium that bought your debt is called Vance Global Transit, Mom," I said, my voice steady, carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I founded it 5 years ago in New York. We specialize in macro transportation, artificial intelligence transit, routing, and global logistics. This morning, our valuation officially crossed $1.8 billion. I am the sole owner." Emily choked on her breath, staring at me as if she were looking at a ghost. A billion? You? But you took the bus here." "I took the bus because I owned the transit line, Emily," I replied calmly. "I took the bus because I still studied the networks I build. You were so busy looking at the luxury car in your driveway that you never noticed who owned the actual road beneath it." Mom looked as though she had been struck by a physical wave of realization. The color drained completely from her skin as she stared at the daughter she had legally and emotionally erased from her life. The tables hadn't just turned. The entire world they lived in had just been completely rewritten by the daughter they claimed would never amount to anything. My mother sat completely frozen, her eyes darting from the legal documents in Victoria's hands to my calm, unbothered face. The silence in the dining room was heavy, thick with the scent of roasted turkey and the sudden overwhelming realization of her own monumental mistake. Eleanor Banse, a woman who had spent her entire life measuring human worth by the price tag of an automobile, was now looking at a daughter who controlled a $1.8 billion empire. "Vivian." Mom's voice was barely a whisper, trembling with a mixture of awe, embarrassment, and deep sudden fear. You? You bought our debt. But why? After everything, after how we treated you. She couldn't even finish the sentence, her eyes dropping to the table in profound shame. I looked at her, keeping my expression serene. There was no shouting, no anger, and no desire to see them suffer. True power does not need to inflict pain. It simply establishes order. I bought it because, regardless of your choices, I am a Vance, I said, my voice echoing clearly through the quiet room, and I do not allow my family's name to be dragged through public bankruptcy. Victoria, please instruct the legal department to freeze the foreclosure assets immediately. The family home and my parents' personal retirement accounts are to be fully protected under a private subsidiary trust. Dad let out a long, ragged breath, burying his face in his hands, as tears of pure relief streamed through his fingers. He had been saved from total ruin, not by the flashy, expensive strategies of his youngest daughter, but by the quiet, practical child he had spent years teasing. Emily looked up, her face streaked with tears, her arrogance completely vanished. And my company? What happens to my position? Your logistics company is being completely restructured, Emily, I answered firmly, looking her dead in the eye. The era of running a business based on vanity and bad loans is over. Effective immediately, you are removed from the executive board. The company will be managed by a team of professional operators from my New York office. However, I am not leaving you empty-handed. If you are willing to learn, you can start from the ground floor as a junior logistics coordinator. You will learn the business from the bottom up, just like I did. Emily swallowed hard, but looking at the alternative of absolute poverty, she slowly nodded her head, accepting the consequence without a single word of protest. Mom looked at me, her eyes brimming with fresh tears. But this time they weren't tears of panic, they were tears of deep, agonizing regret. She realized that her prejudice had caused her to push away the most capable, loyal person in her life. She had tried to delete me from the family legacy, yet I had just used my own legacy to save her entire world. Vivian, I am so sorry, Mom sobbed quietly, covering her face. I was so blind. I didn't see who you really were. I stood up from the table, smoothing down my jacket. I didn't offer a dramatic speech of forgiveness, nor did I walk away in anger. I simply walked over, placed a gentle reassuring hand on my father's trembling shoulder, and gave my mother a polite, quiet nod. The lesson had been delivered, the consequences were set, and a new, professional order had been established. My past was finally resolved, and a brighter, cleaner future was opening up for all of us. Leaving my parents' house that evening, I did not call for a private limousine, nor did I board the corporate helicopter waiting in the field. Instead, I walked down the quiet, tree-lined suburban street back to the local transit stop. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant woods. As I stepped onto the commuter bus and took my familiar place by the window, a deep, unbreakable sense of peace washed over me. Looking out at the passing city lights, I reflected on the long, quiet journey that had brought me here. For years, I had walked a path of absolute isolation, carrying the heavy burden of being misunderstood by the very people who were supposed to protect my dreams. My mother had looked at my simplicity and seen a lack of ambition. My family had looked at my love for public transit and seen a symbol of failure. They were entirely blinded by the glittering, superficial markers of status expensive cars, the loud titles, the desperate need for external validation. But true success is never about what you possess. It is about what you build. It is about the quiet resilience to keep moving forward when the world tells you that you are standing completely still. I never needed to own a car to prove my worth, because I understood a fundamental truth that my family had to learn the hard way. A luxury vehicle can only take you as far as the driveway, but a visionary mind can build the infrastructure that moves an entire society. My journey is proof that you do not need to shout to be heard, and you do not need to seek revenge to find justice. By staying true to my purpose, maintaining my dignity, and working tirelessly in the shadows, I built a legacy that speaks for itself. And when the storm finally hit my family, my success became their sanctuary. I did not use my $1.8 billion empire to crush them. I used it to elevate them, teaching them that true power is always paired with grace, and true wealth is measured by the stability you provide to others. As the bus rolled smoothly toward the downtown terminal, connecting seamlessly with the vast network I had spent my life designing, I smiled. The road ahead was long, infinite, and beautifully clear. I was Vivian Vance, the girl who supposedly would never amount to anything, sitting quietly on a public bus, watching the world move precisely the way I taught it to. What an incredible, emotional conclusion to Vivian's journey. She proved that silence, patience, and true vision will always outlast superficial noise and arrogance. Now, I want to hear from all of you. If you were in Vivian's shoes, at that Thanksgiving dinner table, would you have chosen the path of grace and saved your family, or would you have walked away completely? Drop your answers and thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them. If this story inspired you to keep pushing for your dreams, no matter who doubts you, please give this video a huge thumbs up. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications so you never miss our next dramatic, heart-pounding family stories. Thank you so much for watching, keep building your own empires, and I will see you in the next emotional stories.